Chapter 99. I'm sorry, I'm a disgrace to France. Seeing that the chat was starting to get noisy, she quickly changed the subject. We'll see what the game's like once we play it, right? The game wasn't big, so after buying it, it was quickly downloaded and installed. With some curiosity and excitement, Luke adjusted her stream settings and started the game. Seeing the Nebula Games logo at the beginning, Luke was full of curiosity. This was a small 2D indie game that didn't look very large, so how was it going to show the horrors of war and deliver an anti-war message? But because of past great indie games like Undertale and To the Moon, she had some faith in Nebula Games. This background music sounds so good, so the main character is a soldier with a search and rescue dog. With a mix of sad strings and piano playing in the background, the game's UI appeared. An old soldier in uniform was holding a leash attached to a black search dog, standing among broken ruins. After staying on the screen for a few seconds and listening to the music, Luke clicked to start the game as instructed. After confirming, the screen went black for a moment, and then a map of Europe appeared, showing the borders and flags of different countries. August 1, 1914, after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, the German Empire declared war on the Russian Empire. Because of their alliance, France also began to prepare for war. A few hours after the general mobilization began, Germans living in France were told to leave. Karl was one of them. A series of comic-style cutscenes followed, giving a simple overview of the time period. He wasn't very familiar with World War I, but it wasn't completely new to her either. What caught his attention was the game's way of presenting the story. So far, the intro felt a bit like Undertale, with the story told in comic form. As Luke was thinking about this, the screen switched to a farm, and a time and place appeared in the top right corner, August 1, 1914, Saint-Mihiel, France. A young blonde man was using a pitchfork to move hay, while his wife sat on a hay cart behind him, holding their baby. The sky was blue, the sun was shining, it all looked peaceful and perfect. But suddenly, two soldiers on bicycles showed up at the farm and grabbed Karl by the arm. Right away, the sad background music started playing, and the bright sunny sky turned dark and gloomy. As the sad music played, a woman's heart-wrenching voice rang out. Karl's wife, holding their baby, reached out her right hand, trying to keep him from being taken away. But in the end, Karl was still taken by the soldiers and led out of France. Behind him, Karl's father-in-law and wife slowly lowered their heads as they watched him leave, and tears fell from his wife's eyes. There were no spoken lines, but with the sound effects, the colors, and the music, Luke could feel the heavy, sorrowful mood. The screen briefly went black, and a line of white text appeared in the center, a few days later. A few days after Karl's departure, the quiet farm was disturbed by the arrival of a letter. At the top of the letter it read, Armée de Terre et Armée de Mer, Army and Navy. It was a draft letter from the French government. The sad background music now mixed with the sounds of battle and soldiers shouting, adding weight to the game's atmosphere. A few days after Karl left, the war got worse, and even Emil was taken away. Summoned to fight, Emil left the farm with a heavy heart and went to Saint-Mihiel. Like many others, he had no idea what was waiting for him. When Emil arrived in Saint-Mihiel, he joined the new soldier training camp. In gameplay terms, this was just the basic tutorial. The game used a 2D side-scrolling style, and the controls were simple: move left and right, attack and throw. That was pretty much it. Following the instructions, Luke picked up a grenade from a nearby box and threw it at the straw dummy target ahead. She threw a few in a row. After the first grenade destroyed the dummy, the instructor led Emil forward. While following the game's instructions and chatting with her viewers, Luke didn't pay attention to one of the grenades she had thrown earlier, which was still flashing red on the ground. A loud boom pulled her attention back to the game. The game screen went dark, then returned to the previous training level. Did I just blow myself up? Did I really die during military training? Sorry, I've truly embarrassed France. Thinking about what had just happened, Luke was left speechless. Meanwhile, the livestream chat was flooded with messages. I'm dying of laughter, that grenade's throw from Luke was godlike. I killed myself. So this is what a French soldier is like. Here we go again, the France memes are starting up again. Looking at the non-stop comments, Luke could only smile helplessly. This really wasn't something she did for laughs. It happened because she was reading the chat while playing and wasn't focused. But seeing the comments, she still decided to explain. Ahem, let's not go too far, guys. World War I France and World War II France are totally different. This game is set in WWI, and back then, French soldiers were beyond brave. They were basically the backbone of the Allies. As for WWII, yeah, let's not go there. After finishing the training tutorial, Emil raised the army flag as the flag bearer, while the La Marseillaise played in the background. The whole moment had a strangely humorous vibe. Next, Emil had to go to the train station to find his unit. He had now officially left home behind. Paris Station, Emil is at platform 21, looking for the unit he belongs to. He's about to meet the comrade who will fight alongside him for the rest of his life. At the platform, a group of French soldiers surrounded and picked on a black soldier. Emil's job here was to help the man out. This part was still part of the tutorial, mainly teaching players how the game's puzzle solving worked. Hey, this is kinda interesting. Undertale was all about bullet dodging, To the Moon was just story-based. This game, Valiant Hearts, seems to be packed with puzzle mechanics in the later levels. First, use the lever on the right to smoke out the soldier standing there. Then, after talking to the officer, you learn he doesn't want red wine. Find a bottle of beer to bribe him, use the band to draw away the soldiers guarding the train, and finally pull the left lever to smoke out the soldier on the left, successfully helping the black soldier get out of trouble. This section wasn't hard. The hints were obvious, but the design still felt detailed and polished to Luke. It was clear that Valiant Hearts, the Great War, was also a story-driven game. Last year's To the Moon was fantastic, but in terms of gameplay, there really wasn't much to it. The puzzle segments felt like an afterthought. But now, with Valiant Hearts combining puzzle mechanics, combat skills like throwing from the training, and directional movement in the train station scene. Even though the game is a 2D side-scroller, Luke was already looking forward to what came next. In terms of gameplay variety, this one clearly had a lot more to offer. Just casually begging, please let this poor, clueless author see what recommendation votes and monthly votes actually look like. By the way, this is my first time playing, and I didn't even die from enemy shells. I blew myself up during training. End of chapter. Read +90 advanced chapters on my Pater *n. Patreon.com/Gustina Camia. Free tier can read 3 advanced chapters. After helping the black soldier out, you learn through conversation that he's from the United States and has joined the Allied forces. The train station scene had a very cheerful tone. Especially when the soldiers started dancing along with the band, it had Luke chuckling non-stop. But the fun and jokes didn't last long, because the game was set during World War I. As the narrator explained, Emil's unit was sent to face off against the German 71st Division, led by Baron von Dorf. Whatever excitement people had was quickly crushed by the fear of going into battle for the first time. On the battlefield, Emil served as the flag bearer. Once the commander gave the order, the soldiers charged forward. This gameplay section felt a bit like the bullet dodging mechanics in Undertale. The whole game used a 2D side-scrolling format. Players had to move back and forth to dodge the falling shells from above. The shells came raining down like dumplings, falling toward Emil and the others, but they had no choice but to keep charging. The commander at the front was killed instantly by an explosion, and Emil took his place as the flag bearer. But with German machine guns and artillery firing at them, it was a charge with no hope, brutal and bloody. Before the charge, the sky had been clear and sunny. Now it was dark and overcast, and the ground was covered with the bodies of fallen French soldiers. The sounds of gunfire, the background music turning from majestic to mournful, even though it was just a cartoon-style 2D game, Luke still felt the horror and tragedy of war. In the game, just as Emil charged forward, a bullet struck him down without mercy. With the heavy rain and somber background music playing, the scene suddenly shifted to the German side. Among the soldiers, one blonde man stood out. It was Karl. So Emil was drafted by France, and after being deported, Karl was drafted by Germany too. This family is now forced to fight for their own countries, and possibly even face each other in battle. And wait, does this mean Emil is dead? Luke instantly realized something. Could it be that Valiant Hearts, the Great War, is telling a story like this? A tragic tale of family members fighting each other, showing how national duty clashes with family bonds, and using that to highlight how brutal war really is. It definitely seemed possible, but if that's the direction the story goes, wouldn't it be a bit too melodramatic? Luke thought about it but didn't say anything. Instead, she just explained the current events to her livestream audience. Having played Undertale and To the Moon, she believed this game probably wouldn't be that cliché. And besides, it's only been 10 minutes since the game started. Miss Marie Chéron, Private Émile Chéron of the 150th Infantry Regiment, was wounded in battle on August 21 and has been taken prisoner by the enemy. We hope to hear news from him soon. With sad orchestral music in the background, a narrator spoke up. The scene shifted to Émile's farm. His daughter cried uncontrollably as she read the letter in her hands. At least this part gave Luke and her viewers a bit of relief. He was captured but still alive. That was something to be glad about. As Luke was trying to guess what would happen next, maybe Émile and Karl would escape the German army together, or maybe Karl would help Émile escape. The screen shifted to a different character. The black soldier Émile had helped earlier at the train station. Freddy, an American soldier, volunteered to join the Allies at the start of the war. Behind his brave face was a heart already broken and scarred by the horrors of war. He had only one goal: to punish the ones who ruined his life. It wasn't until the Battle of the Marne that Freddy finally tracked down the unit led by Baron von Dorf. Listening to the narration and seeing the comic book style panels, Luke pretty much got the idea of this new character's background. Karl and Émile were both drafted against their will. But Freddy, an American, had come to Europe and joined the Allies, not out of some sense of justice. He was here for revenge. Most likely, the German army, especially the one led by this Baron von Dorf, was responsible for killing his wife. Luke thought back to the photo shown in his introduction and guessed that might be the case. Still, she couldn't be sure. So far, this game had given her a very unique feeling. There were barely any lines of dialogue. Instead, the game used serious narration, which made it feel almost like watching a documentary. At the same time, the game was filled with moments of light, clever humor, just enough to make the player smile. But before you could really enjoy it, the cartoonish art style would suddenly hit you with the harsh reality of war. That contrast made the humor feel even more bitter and ironic. Then there was the gameplay itself. Unlike Émile's bullet-dodging sections, playing as Freddy introduced stealth and puzzle-solving mechanics. Just like the game's description said, Valiant Hearts, the Great War was a puzzle-focused game. Émile hadn't really shown much of that side yet. But with Freddy, you had to make use of various in-game tools and systems to sneak deep into enemy territory. For example, in the current level, it didn't take long for Luke to figure out the trick. First, use a grenade to blow down the ladder. Then, time the machine gunner's shooting pattern and climb up the ladder to reach the target. After that, use rocks or other tools to make noise and distract the enemies. While they're not paying attention, go back down the ladder and knock them out with punches as strong as sandbags. Just like Nebula Games' earlier game Outlast, even though this one is set during World War I, at least for now the player has no gun. All you can do is rely on your fists, and sometimes use pliers to cut through barbed wire. Maybe because it's the beginning of the game, the puzzle isn't too hard. Luke quickly figured out what to do after taking a quick look. But there was one thing she also noticed. Even though the game's art style looks cartoonish and funny, and the story hasn't started making any big moral points yet, it's full of satire. For example, at the train station, you have to bribe an officer with beer. And in Freddy's mission, while German soldiers are fighting up front, the officer Baron von Dorf is just in his room tasting wine. When Allied forces break through the defense line, he immediately escapes in a blimp. After finishing Freddy's part, he angrily tears the German flag in half. Then, just like before, the screen fades to black. At the same time, a voiceover appears along with a comic-style background. Because of reinforcements from the British, the German plan failed. The front line shifted north and winter arrived. Karl's team retreated to the outskirts of Neuve-Chapelle, which was also where Emil was being held. So Emil and Carl will meet each other. Looking at this background info, Luke quietly muttered to herself. In the next scene, the player is back in control of Emil. Unlike before when he wore a military uniform, now Emil is in a plain kitchen apron. His legs are chained, and he's holding a big metal spoon. Looks like he's become a cook for the German army. Here, besides Baron von Dorf, Luke also sees another familiar character, the German search dog that was shown earlier in the game's intro and UI screen. After giving the dog some water, Emil heads into the warehouse to cook. At that moment, Carl sneaks in to see him. They're both really happy to meet. Carl asks about Emil's wife. Emil hands him a letter and photo from his daughter. But before they can say much more, soldiers outside waiting for food start yelling, so Carl and Emil have to split up quickly. Just as Emil brings the big pot of food outside, British artillery begins to rain down. In the bombing, Emil gets buried under falling rubble. The screen turns black and silent, making both Luke and her viewers at home feel worried about Emil. End of the chapter. Read +100 advanced chapters on my pater *n. patreon.com/Gustina Camia. Free tier can read 3 advanced chapters. A rescue dog, so the dog is our teammate now. About 2 or 3 seconds after the screen went dark, barking came from the game. With the sound of barking and scratching at rubble, the German rescue dog they had seen earlier dug Emil out. After being saved by the dog, Emil went on to rescue a German soldier, and from him learned that Karl had escaped with Baron von Dorf on an airship. So the man and the dog pushed forward, fighting to survive. The gameplay wasn't much different from before. What stood out to Luke, though, was the big soup ladle in Emil's hand. Just like those nuclear-powered flashlights in horror games, this ladle is no ordinary ladle. Controlling Emil, Luke dug out a tunnel with it, amazed at how powerful it was. In the game, the dog would also bark to hint at spots where you could find collectible items. But these items had nothing to do with the story, they were just for unlocking achievements. As they moved forward, Luke triggered hidden underground shells and got blown up 2 or 3 times. The shells weren't meant to be guessed at, they were shown clearly. But in the narrow tunnels, they were so sensitive that a light touch would set them off. Plus, digging with a ladle had a slightly clunky hitbox, so it was a bit tricky. After a few mistakes, Luke finally managed to dig a safe path. That's when the dog suddenly got excited. The screen switched to a scene showing 2 German soldiers fixing a truck in the distance. On a nearby toolbox sat 2 German sausages and a pretzel. The dog dashed toward the sausages without thinking, only to get caught in barbed wire. Seeing this, Emil rushed over to free the dog, but at that moment, the repaired truck on the slope behind the wire began to roll down. Oh no, is the dog going to die? Can't resist food at all. Guess it's not man dies for wealth, but dog dies for food. Luke was reminded of when she had seen a shiny cross underground earlier and went for it with the ladle without noticing the shell ahead and got blown up. She knew the dog probably wouldn't die here, but still felt nervous. What if Nebula Games didn't follow the usual script? Just before the truck rolled down, the game faded to black with a line of text. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the scene shifted to a temporary base where the British were preparing to attack Neuve-Chapelle, with Freddy among them. Because of a shortage of troops, the British had recruited soldiers from India and other colonies. Freddy charged into the front lines with a group of Indian soldiers. The gameplay for Freddy's part wasn't too different from before, but it was noticeably harder. In a tense moment, Freddy saved Emil and the German rescue dog, cutting through the barbed wire and freeing Emil's shackles. No one would have guessed they'd meet again on such a chaotic battlefield. After a brief talk, Freddy learned from Emil about Karl, and that they shared the same goal, taking down Baron von Dorf's army. Freddy decided to join Emil. When they reached Ypres, they spotted von Dorf's troops. This was where the Germans first used chlorine gas. Only the small dog could fit through to shut off the gas valve. This puzzle section was a bit more complicated than before. Still, compared to full-on puzzle games, the challenges here were easy to figure out with a little thought. And if you really couldn't, the hint button gave helpful clues, very player-friendly. Controlling Emil and the dog, they quickly wrecked the underground chlorine gas machine. With the gas gone, Freddy and Emil joined the soldiers in an attack. But then, von Dorf's Zeppelin above began dropping gas bombs. In the chaos, Emil and the dog hid underground, while Freddy stayed above. Just as Freddy had once saved them, now it was their turn to save Freddy. Using a bone as a lever, they opened an elevator so Freddy could drop down. Looking at Emil and the dog, Freddy saluted and said one of the few voice lines in the game. "Thank you, my friend." "No need for thanks, we're all friends here," Luke said with a smile at the screen, but there was no time to relax. The chlorine gas was catching up fast, and they had to rely on Emil's ladle to dig through the tunnels. Finally breaking through to the surface, they ran for their lives, with the gas right on their heels. Just then, the sound of a car horn came from nearby, and in the distance, a blonde woman in a car shouted to them. The next moment, the game screen switched to a cutscene. Her name is Anna. She's a Belgian student living in Paris, and she's never stopped searching for her missing father. Finally, one day, fate smiled on them. They were heading in the same direction. But on the way to Neuville-Saint-Vaast, they were spotted by a German unit. By this point, all the main characters of the game had appeared. Emil, the French soldier captured and made to work as a cook, Karl, the German soldier, Freddy, who wanted revenge, Anna, searching for her father, and a search and rescue dog. 3 men, 1 woman, and 1 dog. These are the main characters of the game. There's even a driving level in this game. This Anna feels just like me. Luke, sitting at his computer, lit up when he saw this stage. Driving, now that's something he knew well. With Hungarian dance number 5 playing in the background, the taxi sped madly under the moonlight, adding a playful, comical tone to the game. Even better, the bombs and strafing from planes in the game seemed perfectly timed with the music. Still, no matter how perfect the timing was, when it came to dodging those bombs, Luke found himself scrambling a bit. At the start, the car was in perfect condition, but after a round of shelling and gunfire, the roof was gone, the engine was smoking, and even the license plate was bent. Luckily, he made it through the stage in one piece. What's this about women drivers? I'll have you know I'm amazing at driving. Just a couple of days ago, I passed my 2nd driving test. Even my instructor said I have talent. Luke laughed and joked as he read the comments on screen. This had to be the funniest scene in the game so far. The chat, carried by the light-hearted mood of the game, quickly joined in. "Instructor, who said that? Not me." To be fair, Luke is talented at driving. He only needed 6 tries to pass his 2nd test. Speaking of which, imagine if instead of Hungarian dance number 5, they played Flight of the Bumblebee for this stage. Are you a devil? But the cheerful mood didn't last long. Right at the end, a shell hit them, sending Freddy, who was outside the car, flying. End of the chapter. Read +100 advanced chapters on my pater *n. patreon.com/Gustina Camia. Free tier can read 3 advanced chapters. Faced with an injured Freddy, Anna, though a doctor, couldn't treat his wounds without any medical supplies. So Emil and the dog went deep into German territory to find medicine for him. Luke could clearly feel that this puzzle section was much harder than before. Not only did she need to watch the patrol routes of German soldiers, but she also had to work together with the dog. After quite a bit of effort, Luke finally had Emil find the medicine to treat Freddy. By then, Baron von Dorf had already escaped. Once Freddy was treated, Emil and the others quickly set off again. This time their journey took them to Reims, but the Germans launched an air raid there, leaving the city in ruins and its people in misery. The once bustling metropolis was torn apart by Zeppelin bombings, with countless buildings destroyed. Many French civilians fled to find safety. Seeing the destruction, the furious Freddy wanted to check things out, but another shell landed nearby, forcing him to hide in a hole. The explosion dropped a massive piece of debris at the entrance, trapping him inside and separating him from Emil and Anna. On the other side, seeing the Zeppelin in the distance and realizing he couldn't rejoin Emil, Freddy went after it alone. Anna stayed to treat the wounded, while Emil couldn't move the debris by himself. It would take 5 people to push it aside. So he had to work with the dog to rescue trapped civilians, then ask for their help to clear the way and catch up to Freddy. Watching this unfold on Shark TV, Luke smacked her lips in thought. Why do I feel like this story is hinting at something? Freddy's the one getting blown up every single time, and with his skin color. Luke stopped there. She knew the chat would take care of the rest. After glancing at the chat, which was already running with the idea, Luke focused back on the game. While saving the people of Reims, she noticed a special detail. In the game, whether it was Emile or any other NPC, none of the characters had eyes. But a little girl trapped in a room had a pair of bright, clear eyes. It was an obvious and ironic contrast. Well, except for the dog walking next to Emile, of course. After rescuing the civilians, Emile and the dog quickly followed after Freddy. In the cathedral, they ran into Baron von Dorf. This kicked off 2 back-to-back boss fights. In the first, Emile and the dog had to attack through the organ's pipes, a very creative setup. In the second, you controlled Freddy to grab grenades thrown down by Baron von Dorf before they exploded, then used them to hit the Zeppelin's propellers. After destroying 2 of the Zeppelin's propellers, Baron von Dorf escaped again. At that moment, you could see that the pilot of the airship was actually Carl. Meanwhile, Anna ignored Emile and Freddy, driving off with the dog straight toward the spot where the Zeppelin was going to crash. It was here that the player finally learned the story behind the last main character, Anna. 9 months earlier, Anna had been training to become a veterinarian. When she got a letter from her father, the German army was only 20 miles from Paris. Her father told her he was in good health and suggested she not return to their home in Belgium until the war was over. But patience was not in Anna's nature. She decided to go and find her father. In Paris, all the taxis had been taken to transport soldiers to the Marne front. So Anna found a broken-down car on the street, fixed it, and drove toward the front lines posing as a taxi driver. Like the earlier rescue of Emile and Freddy, this was another driving minigame. With the lively can-can music in the background, it felt even more cheerful than before. The ringing of nearby car bells and the shaking barrels in other vehicles matched the beat perfectly. The best part came in the middle of the trip, when 2 cars suddenly pulled alongside, boxing Anna's taxi in and swaying from side to side, really showing what it meant to be trapped in the middle. The music shifted from the upbeat can-can to a Fenbach's barcarolle, making it feel like you were drifting along the canals of Venice at night. But before you could fully get into the mood, it switched right back to the lively can-can without a pause. Seeing this, Luke at his computer and the viewers in the stream couldn't help laughing. It was such a joyful and fun scene. Anna in the game was also clearly having a great time. September 7, 1914, after driving all night, Anna felt proud and happy to help the soldiers reach the front. The next second, the entire tone of the game changed. Until Anna arrived at the front and saw the brutal reality with her own eyes. Anna in the game, Luke in real life, and the viewers all fell silent. The battlefield was dead quiet, littered with bodies. The corpses of fallen soldiers and horses were piled high. Even with the game's hand-drawn 2D art, the weight of the scene still came through the screen. The contrast with the earlier cheerful scenes made it hit even harder. Moved by compassion, Anna stayed at the front to care for the wounded. Every life she saved felt like a small victory against the war. She sawed off dead, infected arms, and under the bridge, bodies were piled like garbage. Then she heard a cry for help from the rubble. It was an enemy soldier, still alive. Anna didn't care about sides, she removed the bullet and saved him. While treating the wounded, she overheard French officers talking about Belgium. They said the Germans were planning to test a new type of poison gas near Ypres, Anna's hometown. Fearing for her father's safety, Anna decided to return to Ypres. At home, the rescued governess told Anna that her father had been taken by Baron von Dorf, who wanted to use advanced weapons in the war, so Anna set out to find him. This led to the earlier scene where she saved Emile and Freddy at the last moment. Emile, Freddy, and Anna, 3 people from different countries and backgrounds, now shared a common goal. The game's timeline then caught up with before. Chasing the Zeppelin, Anna reached the target area but found no sign of her father. Instead, she saw Karl badly wounded and trapped. She helped him escape, and he told her that before the Zeppelin crashed, Baron von Dorf had fled with her father on the airship's emergency plane. The wounded Karl was then sent to a POW camp, while Emil, branded a deserter, was brought before a military court. Thanks to his actions in Reims, Emil was released. But the place he was released into was the front lines at a name everyone knew, Verdun. Reaching the front, Emil fought alongside other soldiers for 3 months, as autumn turned into a harsh winter. Like everyone else, he suffered not only from the war but also from the freezing cold. The greatest comfort for soldiers on the battlefield was letters from home. Emil received one from his daughter. But it had no good news: food shortages, disease spreading, death tolls climbing. In all the despair, there was only one small light: a photo of his grandson Victor taking his first steps. During this time, the German army launched another attack, but luckily Emil once again survived the battle. Because of his outstanding contribution, he was awarded a medal along with Freddy. On the other side, Anna brought good news too. Karl, who had been seriously injured, was almost fully recovered. But at the same time, the war grew more and more brutal. Casualties climbed to 70,000 each month, and Verdun became known as the meat grinder. As the fighting became more intense, Emil and Freddy were sent on a mission to retake Fort Douaumont. There they ran into their old rival, Baron von Dorf. Freddy and the dog held off von Dorf, while Emil went to set off the explosives inside the fort. Although the fortress was blown up in the end, the German army still managed to hold their ground. The mission had failed. Looking at the distant fort, Emil felt utterly crushed. "Marie, my dear, the war has taken the life of a close friend, someone like a brother to me. His death has hit me harder than I can put into words. Let's talk about something happier. Karl has recovered. His health is getting better and better. I'll visit him on my next leave. How are you? Are you doing well?" But Emil didn't know that, at the same time, Karl had received a letter from Marie. In the letter, she wrote that Victor, their son, had fallen seriously ill. Karl wanted to see his wife and child, but he knew the war wouldn't stop, so he made a decision: he would escape the prison camp. Watching the story unfold bit by bit, Luke, sitting in front of the computer, felt an unbearable heaviness. She had now fully experienced the cruelty of war. No way, Freddy's dead, the dog too, and now Karl is going to escape the prison camp. Something bad will happen to him too. Even though the game had now switched to Karl's perspective, Luke didn't start playing right away. She was still lost in the information she had just learned. End of the chapter. Sitting at her computer, Luke felt weighed down. From the cheerful humor at the start, to the mix of brutality and humor in the middle, now there was only the most merciless side of war. 3 men, 1 woman, and 1 dog, that was the full cast of the game's main characters. As a game meant to show the cruelty of war, it used a graffiti-style 2D cartoon look. The playful cartoon style clashed sharply with the horrors of war. In the game, there were also many collectible items, each recording real historical events. It made the game feel like it was telling a true story from history. Unlike most anti-war games, this one didn't focus on the surface of war, it showed what war was like on the inside. It didn't describe war from a big-picture view. None of the characters had anything to do with war at first. They were all dragged into the Great War because of politics. Karl, Emil, Freddy, and Anna cared more about the safety and happiness of their families. Not a single one of them wanted to contribute to the war. For them, this was a war born from pathetic pride, cruel misunderstandings, failed diplomacy, blind nationalism, and years of distrust and hatred. None of these things had anything to do with them, except that they destroyed the small happiness they once had. Freddy fought to avenge his wife, Anna searched for her father, and Emil and Karl were forced into the army. On the battlefield, they didn't care about victory, only about whether their loved ones were safe. The game let players feel the pain war brings through the eyes of these ordinary people. As small figures on the battlefield, the characters faced gunfire, muddy trenches, freezing winters, and the threat of deadly weapons. They all shared one wish: for the war to end soon so they could go home. Luke couldn't help but feel the emotions the game was trying to express. He moved Karl toward his escape from the prison camp almost mechanically, but his mind was still on Freddy and the dog, whose fates were uncertain, and on Emil, still outside the fort. Then the next part of the game made his breathe a long sigh of relief. Freddy wasn't dead, and neither was the dog. Just like when he had saved Emil, the dog dragged Freddy out from the rubble. Through Freddy's memories here, Luke's guesses about his backstory were confirmed. The reason Freddy hated the war so much was because it had taken his wife's life. On Freddy's side, Anna's father, the old professor, had also survived, and the two of them repaired a damaged tank. Driving the tank, the two smashed their way out of the castle, while on the other side, Emil also managed to make it back. The mission had failed, but bringing back the old professor and capturing a tank still excited the French army. The group took a photo together, and Emil wrote a letter to Anna. But the reunion was short-lived. Soon Emil and Freddy went their separate ways, Freddy heading to the Somme, and Emil sent to Vauquois Hill to fight the Germans in underground tunnel warfare. Here both sides dug furiously, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. The enemy and friendly forces were sometimes separated by only a thin layer of dirt, so even stethoscopes for medical use were turned into tools for war. "This is just so heavy and suffocating," Luke said with a sigh, watching the game's scenes unfold. Canaries locked in cages to test the level of poison gas underground, and miners dying one after another. Even though the art style was still cartoonish graffiti, now it only felt depressing. At this moment, a cry for help came from the right side of the screen. Luke controlled Emil in the game and dug toward the right. Compared to before, when Emil only had a soup spoon, now he had better equipment. He had gone from a cook to a miner, with a military shovel replacing the spoon. This is a German officer, not one of ours. After opening a path, Luke saw a German officer hanging in midair after accidentally triggering a cable, waving and shouting for help. "Sigh, just another victim of the war. Hang on, I'll come save you." Looking at the game screen, Luke sighed and, together with the dog, used a wheel nearby to lower the German officer. Once on the ground, the German officer saw Emil running over and put away the gun in his hand ahead of time, then reached out his hand in a friendly way. "Did I just make a German friend?" Luke said in surprise in front of the computer. In the game, the path to the left was blocked, so Emil could only work with the German officer to find a new way out. The two cooperated along the way and managed to escape. When Emil was about to leave, a group of German soldiers found them. But the German officer stepped forward to explain for Emil, helping him return to his unit. Watching the two shake hands and show friendship, Luke smiled slightly in front of the computer. "How nice, this part of the story is so heartwarming. In such a cruel war, scenes like this are truly precious." Luke sighed. "Have you ever read a novel called War Horse? There's a similar scene in it. It's so good, I feel healed." Looks like when Lucas Hart called himself a warrior of love, it wasn't just nonsense. "This story really warms the heart," Luke smiled. The heavy atmosphere in the game had been making her feel uneasy. But now, this warm moment felt like sunlight breaking through in the middle of winter, filling her with warmth. But the warmth didn't last long. In the game, Emil returned to headquarters and received a new mission, to deliver a box. When the box reached its destination, a soldier lifted the white cloth covering it. It was full of explosives. More importantly, the game then gave a close-up of the scene above where the explosives would be placed. A familiar face appeared in Luke's view. "No way, isn't that my friend? No way." Seeing this, Luke had a bad feeling. What happened next confirmed her fears. The explosives went off, dealing heavy damage to the German army and killing the German officer who had saved Emil. The French officer felt proud of the heavy losses dealt to the enemy. But Emil saw it as cowardly behavior. Filled with anger, he refused the medal. Emil threw the medal he had just been given into the burning fire. Then Anna brought him even worse news. Karl had been executed for trying to escape from the prisoner camp. Like Emil in the game, Luke and the other players who reached this point were stunned. At that moment, Luke thought of the praise she had given Lucas Hart earlier, but now she only wanted to say one thing: "Can I rewind?" What happened to the heartwarming part? What healing? This was heartbreaking. That earlier warmth was just to make the pain cut deeper. One moment they were friends, and the next, though I didn't kill him, he died because of me. Luke knew this was war. In fact, real war might be even crueler. But emotionally, it was still hard to bear. End of the chapter. Read +100 advanced chapters on my Pater*N. Patreon.com/Gustina Camia. Free tier can read 3 advanced chapters. From not paying much attention at first, to smiling at some of the funny moments and scenes in the game. Then falling into deep silence, feeling the cruelty that war brings. All the players were drawn into the game's story. Luckily, the next part of Carl's story revealed that Carl hadn't actually died. He had swapped his dog Tag with another dead soldier's, making people think he was dead. In reality, he was doing everything he could to get back to his wife at the farm in Saint Mihiel. On the other side, Emil, who heard about Carl's death, didn't know it was fake. He was heartbroken and fell seriously ill. Meanwhile, Freddy drove the old professor's modified tank to the Somme, cutting through obstacles along the way, and finally defeating Baron von Dorf on the battlefield. In the end, Baron von Dorf was removed from the front lines, a wish many soldiers would have been happy to see. But for someone like Baron von Dorf, this was worse than death, because it meant his military and political career was over. At this moment, Luke felt no joy or excitement over revenge. Right now, what she cared about most was whether Carl was really dead. And what would happen to Emil? With those thoughts, the game screen switched back to Carl. While escaping, he came across Anna and the dog, and finally reached Saint Mihiel, the same place where Emil had once been recruited. But times had changed. Now the place had become a German training camp for new soldiers. Here, the rescue dog met his original owner again, just like what had happened earlier in the mines. The next moment, the French began shelling Saint Mihiel. With the help of new friends, Carl and the dog were the first to rush into a building, only for Carl to be killed instantly by an explosion. Sitting in front of the computer, watching this scene play out, Luke pressed his lips together. By this point, he no longer knew how to describe what he was feeling. After escaping the camp, the French army began using poison gas. After countless hardships, Carl finally made it back to his family's farm, only for disaster to strike. A poison gas shell fell from the sky. Emil's farm was destroyed in an instant, and his wife Marie and their son were trapped under the collapsed house. Carl searched for a long time before finally finding Marie and his son. Marie gave a makeshift gas mask to their son, leaving herself exposed to the poison. Seeing this, Carl didn't hesitate. He took off his own gas mask and put it on Marie. Without his mask, Carl dragged Marie toward the outside. As they moved, Carl kept trying to comfort the unconscious Marie. "Marie, it's me, I'm here." In the end, without the gas mask, he couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed. In Luke's headphones came the heartbreaking sound of the boy crying. Sitting at the computer, Luke's eyes turned red. At the same time, there was still a faint hope. A hope that the game's creators wouldn't be so cruel as to let Carl and Marie die here. But clearly, the game wasn't going to tell the player what happened to Carl next. The screen shifted to Emil's side of the story. April 16, 1917. Emil was still sick, but at the front, a general named Nivelle ordered all soldiers who could still stand to join his massive attack. The light-hearted style from earlier in the game was gone. Now the whole scene was dark and grim. At the ruined front lines, an officer waved his sword and yelled at Emil to gather soldiers who could still charge. The French army launched another assault. Once again, it was another battle that might end the war. But before this, they had already fought in countless battles like it. Watching the game now, Luke no longer chatted or made comments like before. He was simply experiencing the story. Following the officer's orders, the soldiers used piles of broken corpses as cover and kept charging forward. Compared to earlier levels, this last one was much harder. The enemy's attacks were too intense, and every good opening had to be timed perfectly. In the game, all the soldiers seemed numb. They were all afraid, but under the officer's threats, they had no choice but to attack. This stage gave Luke, and every player, only one feeling: overwhelming pressure. The ground was covered with bodies, the blood soaking the earth red. The game's colors were as dark as the night sky. Under heavy gunfire, Emil and his teammates pushed forward little by little, while the men beside him kept falling one after another. The only choice was to keep charging. Any pause or retreat, and the officers behind would shoot you on the spot. They charged using the bodies of fallen comrades, even using corpse-filled carts to push forward. The number of attackers grew smaller and smaller until only Emil was left. Even then, the officer behind him still raised his gun and ordered the soldiers to keep charging. A shell exploded next to Emil, knocking him unconscious, but the officer still forced the trembling soldiers forward. When Emil came to, he saw the officer shouting and the terrified soldiers shuffling ahead. Slowly, he stepped forward. The game didn't give any hints here, but players everywhere made the same choice, just as Emil believed was right. He swung his shovel hard at the officer's head, ending the pointless charge and sacrifice. The Nivelle offensive was a bloodbath, a massacre. Soon, mutinies broke out among the French infantry, bringing the attack to an end. Emil and another soldier were put in jail, waiting for the verdict of the military court. Emil was going to be tried. Seeing this, Luke, sitting in front of his computer, felt a chill in his heart and had a bad feeling. But the next moment, the camera switched again, now showing Karl. Compared to the hellish, suffocating atmosphere earlier, there seemed to be a ray of sunlight here. The dog, a German rescue dog, had dragged Karl and his family out of the poison gas, then traveled a great distance to find Anna and bring her to Karl's farm. After some quick emergency care, Karl was sent to a field hospital and finally woke up. After years of war, the family was finally reunited. Seeing Karl hugging Marie and their son, Luke let out a long sigh of relief in front of his computer. At the same time, he also felt a flicker of hope. Even though the earlier story had been too cruel, too dark, seeing Karl's warm family scene now made him think maybe things would also take a turn for the better for Emil. With that hope in mind, Luke continued playing the game. End of the chapter. Read +100 advanced chapters on my Pater *n. Patreon.com/Gustina Camia. Free tier can read 3 advanced chapters. After Karl's family reunion, the screen went black for a moment. Marie, who had not heard from Emil for a long time, finally received a letter from her father a few weeks later. A sad BGM began to play softly, and the scene shifted to Emil's prison cell. The cell door opened, and an officer walked in to tell Emil that it was time. Here, Emil's clothes were tattered, and shackles were on his feet. There were no hints, he could only keep walking forward. At this moment, Luke, at his computer, had a terrible guess in his mind. On the way forward, none of the soldiers looked down on Emil. When he passed, they saluted, took off their hats, or turned their heads away, not wanting to look at him. Even in the game, when Luke stopped controlling Emil's steps, the soldiers and officers escorting him didn't show impatience, they simply stood there, waiting for him. No violent shoving or rushing, just quiet waiting. With the sad piano music, Emil's narration slowly began, in step with his footsteps. Dear Marie, for me the war is over. I have no regrets in my heart, I've seen too many horrors. I hope fate will be kinder to you. Our days together were short, but my whole life has been filled with happiness, and for that I am only grateful. I have received so many blessings, especially the blessing of heaven bringing you into my life. This is my last letter. I was found guilty by the military court for killing an officer. Even though I didn't really want to kill him. War drives people mad. Although I let Karl down, I know my sacrifice was not in vain. As Emil walked forward, one soldier after another took off their hats and saluted him. Freddy was among them. Seeing Emil walking toward his execution, Freddy took off his hat, his face full of sadness. Memories of the past flashed by one after another. The dog Anna, Karl, his daughter, and his grandson. I fought for my country and my freedom, I upheld my dignity. Since fate has made us part here in life and death, then I pray that we will meet again in heaven someday. Please keep praying for me. Forever loving you, Dad. Standing before the execution cross, there was no fear on Emil's face, only calmness. The screen slowly faded into darkness. Bang! A gunshot rang out, followed by the sound of a body hitting the ground. The next moment, a sad melody began to play, and the scene shifted to a cemetery. Under the setting sun, endless rows of wooden crosses stretched out into the distance, with the French flag waving in the wind. Even though their bodies have long turned to dust, they will live on forever in people's hearts. We must cherish these memories and never forget. In front of Emil's grave stood the dog, Carl and Marie with their son, quietly paying their respects. With that, the game came to an end. In front of the computer, Luke's eyes were now completely filled with tears. Her eyes were red as she looked at the ending screen, and she pulled a napkin from the side to gently wipe them. Emil, until the very end, Emil never knew that Carl wasn't dead. He still felt he had let Carl down. Luke's voice was slightly choked. It wasn't that she had never played tragic games before. Just last year, To the Moon had given countless players a love story that was sad yet beautiful. But the core of To the Moon was not the same as Valiant Hearts, The Great War. If there's one word to describe it, it would be heavy. There weren't any over-the-top, emotion-stirring scenes. It was more like boiling a frog slowly, breaking down the player's softest feelings bit by bit through quiet build-up. What it showed was far too cruel, making players feel the weight of it all. In Emil's final words, there was no complaining about his fate. There was only love for his family and no regrets about his life. Unlike many Grand War games, Valiant Hearts, The Great War didn't have flashy scenes. It didn't use ultra-realistic graphics to show the horrors of war. Instead, it brought players closer to families torn apart by war and to people who had suffered because of it. This left an even deeper impact than visuals could. And Emil was just one of countless such stories. You could even say that in the game, Emil and Carl were already lucky compared to many others. But it's exactly because of that luck that the cruelty of war feels even heavier. It wasn't just Luke. Every player who finished Valiant Hearts, The Great War, ended up in tears. Because there were simply too many moments in the game that could break them. One moment, Emil befriends a German officer, and the next, that officer is blown up. The rescue dog meets his original owner, only for that owner to be killed by an explosion. Carl's family of 3 finally reunites, but Emil is taken to be executed. This pattern of warming your heart only to stab it right after happened many times in the game. And it wasn't just the story, the overall presentation of the game added to it. Valiant Hearts, The Great War wasn't a large-scale game at all, lasting only about 3 hours. At first, its sales weren't that high. It was a small game and part of a competition event, and many players were still waiting to see how it did. But the game's ratings shot through the roof, reaching an incredible 9.8 out of 10. Thanks to this, Valiant Hearts, The Great War quickly spread among players. Reviews and related discussions became more and more common. Lucas' heart tricked us again. This game showed us what it means to be a warrior of love. He promised a heartwarming work, but I was completely stunned after playing it. I really want to punch Lucas' heart, but I have to admit I was in tears by the end. The ending was so touching. At first, I doubted how a small game like this could really express anti-war ideas, but Lucas' heart pulled it off. There's no such thing as a good war, and no such thing as a bad peace. In the game, there are indeed valiant hearts, but unlike the subtitle's other meaning, The Great War, a war born from politics and profit, could never be called great. Of course, some players didn't like this style. After all, you can't please everyone, and tastes vary a lot. Lucas' heart couldn't possibly make a game that suited everyone. But while players had mixed preferences, the gaming media all gave it very high praise. End of the chapter. More and more players in gaming media were talking about Valiant Hearts, The Great War. In terms of sales, it obviously couldn't compare to something like Fall Guys. 3 days after release, at a price of just $3, it sold 310,000 copies. That was only 20,000 more than last year's To the Moon. The price difference didn't have much impact. After all, it was only $1 more. The main thing was that last year's To the Moon launch had perfect timing, right when players were paying a lot of attention to Nebula games. But when Valiant Hearts, The Great War came out, not many players were paying attention to it. Aside from Lucas Hart briefly mentioning it on the official blog, the main push came from Nebula Games' own platform recommendations. The fact that it still sold this well shows one thing. Nebula Games has gained a lot more influence compared to last year. Several media outlets also covered Valiant Hearts, The Great War, a unique anti-war game. After all, compared to other anti-war games released around the same time, most were pretty weak. Only Valiant Hearts, The Great War, could truly stand out. For many ordinary designers taking part in this contest, the feeling was completely different. On some industry design forums, designers who had played the game were full of complaints. "I'm done, I finally made a game," and then Lucas Hart joined the contest. Exactly when they announced the contest. You could have at least said something. "I was almost done with my game," and then he just pops up. Who could have guessed they'd been hyping up Dark Souls, and suddenly he joins the contest and even makes a game? This sucks. The key is Valiant Hearts, The Great War is top-notch in both theme and story. And compared to last year's To the Moon, this one also has much richer puzzle gameplay. I feel like this year's contest result is pretty much set in stone. In terms of sales, maybe a few games could compete with Valiant Hearts, The Great War, but for the award, forget it, not worth talking about. 2 weeks after its launch, the contest voting officially began, and unsurprisingly, Valiant Hearts, The Great War took first place. In the official game store, it also got a front-page recommendation, along with an award review written by Game Division. As a World War I-themed game, this work doesn't use grand scenes to depict war, but instead reflects on the pain it brings through the experiences of ordinary people. By portraying the hardships, separations, and reunions of several ordinary people of different nationalities, ethnicities, and backgrounds, it vividly shows the cruelty of war and the deep suffering it causes. Without chasing flashy graphics, its 2D side-scrolling cartoon doodle style makes the game feel old but deeply touching, much like the history it tells. Although it's about war, it doesn't show blood and gore. Scenes like shells falling or soldiers charging and dropping one by one are presented in a cartoon style, making them look almost comical. Isn't that the greatest satire on a war that had just side to begin with? This is a work that completely overturns the traditional war genre. An ordinary person dying in a meaningless war is the strongest condemnation of war. The reviews were glowing, focusing mainly on the game's achievement in storytelling. But outside of small circles like indie game fans and Lucas Hart's followers, the award didn't have a huge impact. For most regular players, it didn't cause much of a stir. The main reason was that, unlike last year, players weren't experiencing a game drought during the contest period. In fact, there were plenty of highly anticipated big titles coming out. Top domestic studios NetDragon and Skynova were promoting their latest VR projects. On PC, Nebula Games, which had shaken up the indie scene last year, was now teasing its first big-budget PC title, Dark Souls, alongside releases from 2 other major game companies. Unlike last year's dry spell, this year's game market was buzzing with excitement. So while Valiant Hearts, The Great War was excellent, it was never going to make a huge splash among the general player base. Just like last year, Lucas got the trophy from Game Division and met with leaders from Magic City Game Division. His application for a senior game designer title had been submitted, and getting approved shouldn't be a problem. The available resources in the official game engine had also increased by another gigabyte. At Nebula Games, Rachel took the certificate and trophy from Lucas and placed them in the wooden cabinet nearby, looking excited. Another certificate and trophy. Feels like one day we could have an offline showroom like the big studios, displaying all our awards. That day will definitely come, Anna said with anticipation. Let's talk about that later, Lucas said with a smile. After chatting briefly with Anna and Rachel, he stood up and headed to the project team to check on the progress of Dark Souls. He also needed to coordinate with the marketing team to lock in the game's promotional strategy and schedule based on its development progress. For a game, especially a AAA title, this is extremely important. There are plenty of past examples to learn from. That's why Lucas takes this part very seriously. He won't let the marketing team hype the game to the skis and promise players the world, only for the dev team to still be sitting on a half-finished product. When he arrived at the Dark Souls project team, Hector looked at him, hesitated, and seemed like he wanted to say something. "Boss Lucas, can't we make the difficulty just a little lower, or maybe add an option for players to choose?" Hector finally spoke up as he watched Lucas work on the game's map design. By now, the combat system for Dark Souls and most of the related stats were basically done. The rest was just adding them into the game, like placing all the different monsters. Through the stats and the core gameplay ideas, Hector and some of the other developers had more or less understood the charm and unique style of Dark Souls. It wasn't like your average ARPG. This game wouldn't hold your hand and start you off with weak enemies, letting you level up bit by bit. It felt much more real. In normal ARPGs, no matter how skilled you are, you're still bound by the numbers. You could never beat the final boss with just a level 1 character. But Dark Souls wasn't like that, even though it still had stats. If you were good enough, even at level 1, with no gear and only a little wooden stick that looked like a chicken drumstick, you could still beat the final boss. That was the magic of Dark Souls. There were no unbeatable enemies. If you couldn't win, it was just because your skills weren't there yet. Gear and levels were only there to help you, nothing more. Still, magic or not, Hector already thought the map design was mean enough. But now, what was he seeing? In the early part of the game, there were already so many strong enemies. And in that small room after the Dragon Bridge on the high wall of Lothric, the first treasure chest players found was actually a monster. Not to mention all the traps. Even the messages written on the ground for players were a mix of truth and lies. Like in the catacombs next to the hanging bridge, there was a message saying the bridge would break. Naturally, players would think it would collapse when they walked to the middle. But in reality, you had to cut it yourself for it to break. And if a player worried the bridge would break and chose another path, they'd run into endless waves of skeleton sword masters, ready to prove that Lords of Cinder were nothing. Ordinary skeleton soldiers were the real bosses. End of the chapter. When Hector said that, Lucas gave a knowing smile. He didn't say a word, just quietly placed a black knight with a huge sword on the Road of Sacrifices map. Was the game too hard? Lucas had already thought this through carefully, even before starting development, and had done market research. Why not follow the game's story order and make Dark Souls 1 first, but choose Dark Souls 3 instead? Because in terms of difficulty, DS3 was much friendlier for new players. And Dark Souls wasn't some game made just to make players suffer. Once you got the hang of it and played it a couple of times, then beat your enemies through your own effort, you'd realize this game was insanely fun, pure joy from start to finish. The only thing was that joy came at a bit of a cost. But Hector clearly didn't know that yet. From Lucas's look and actions, Hector could tell he had no intention of making changes. All Hector could do was quietly mourn for the future players. Players, I tried my best. At worst, when it came time to design the death screen, he'd tell the art team to make the "you died" text look nice. And for every monster, boss, or trap that killed the player, they'd add more close-ups of the death scenes. Might as well make sure players' deaths had some style and variety. After so long in development, most of Dark Souls was basically done. What was left was mostly the final touches and testing. This meant checking all the levels and testing how the player's character fought bosses with different weapons. Then, based on the test results, they'd decide whether to tweak the details or just release it as it was. And during this time, besides working on Dark Souls and entering Valiant Hearts, the Great War into the competition, work on Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys was also moving along. For Fall Guys, the main follow-up work was the operations team, handling different crossovers for items and skins. As for maps, besides the official theme maps, the creative workshop played a huge role in keeping Fall Guys popular. Compared to the last lifetime, Fall Guys also added several new modes. There were team races, solo races, casual stage modes, and rooms where players could set their own rules. But compared to its peak, Fall Guys had lost quite a bit of heat, with peak daily concurrent players now down to about 150,000. On the other hand, Legends of the Three Kingdoms had very high player loyalty. Compared to its launch numbers, the player count had actually gone up. Besides new modes, they also released single duel matches, 2v2 4-player matches, and some new skin events. Nebula Games didn't run any big cash grab top-up events for revenue. But with a growing player base, the money naturally went up. Monthly revenue stayed steady at 11 million, and it was clear that for a long time to come, Legends of the Three Kingdoms would be a steady cash cow. For Fall Guys, the plan was to keep operating it well and keep the community active. It wouldn't be as hot as launch, but it could have a long lifespan. The same was true for Legends of the Three Kingdoms. As a card board game, it could also last for years. At the Nebula Games Experience store, Lucas and his team were getting ready for the next stage of warming up the promotion for Dark Souls. In the project room, all the staff who worked on Dark Souls had gathered. Hector was reporting on the game's completeness, the pros and cons found in testing, and areas that could be improved. At the meeting, Hector again brought up the difficulty issue he'd mentioned before. With a complicated look on his face, he looked at Lucas and hesitated for a while before speaking. "Boss, Lucas, are you really not going to adjust the boss stats for Dark Souls?" As soon as he said it, not only Hector, but also the staff working on combat systems and level stats all nodded without meaning to. They really felt strongly about it. Once all the boss parameters were set, and the monsters and bosses were placed according to Lucas's requests, they became the first group of testers. From the start of the game, everyone had played through it. They knew the game would be hard. After all, the numbers, monster placements, and all the traps in the maps were already there. But when they actually played it, they realized they had been way too naive. The difficulty they imagined was nothing like the real thing. The result was that just the first boss, Eudex Gunda, blocked most of them for a long time. Only a few with real talent managed to beat him after a few tries. And that was only the beginning. It wasn't just the bosses, even regular enemies like the Crystal Lizard or the Katana Guy killed most of them the first time they saw them. Even the crestfallen warrior in Firelink Shrine, after being provoked by 3 attacks in a row, gave them a serious beating. It made them question life. Then came the Lothric Knights on the High Wall, Sword Ones, Spear Ones, the Mimic Chest, the Fat-Winged Knight, and the Puss of Man. Aside from the hollow skeleton grunts, everything else felt like a boss. And even those skeleton grunts, if 2 or 3 attacked together with some undead dogs, would most likely kill you. When they heard Hector's words, Rachel, Anna, and the others working on music, scenery, and other parts of the game all looked surprised. Was this game really that hard? Were people questioning Boss Lucas's stats? In their eyes, Lucas had a huge reputation, and this wasn't just a small detail, it was the core of the game, the numbers. "I'll test it myself later," Lucas said with a smile to Hector. Hector scratched his head, then went on with his report. Ethan from marketing took notes on everything. About 20 minutes later, Lucas, Anna, Rachel, and Ethan, who needed to see the actual gameplay to plan marketing, came to Hector's project group. The first thing they saw on the big demo screen hanging on the wall were 2 big words: "You died." Clearly someone had died while testing and hadn't quit yet. Seeing those familiar words and the grey and dark red UI, Lucas smiled. "Let me take a look." Pulling up a chair, Lucas sat at the computer, quit to the menu, and started a new game. Hector and the others beside him were also watching Lucas with eager eyes, wanting to see the moment they'd been waiting for. End of the chapter. When Lucas entered the game and created a new useless person character, Hector and the others exchanged a knowing look and smiled. They stared wide-eyed at the screen in front of Lucas, as if they were expecting something exciting to happen. Lucas, who was testing the game, naturally noticed their little actions. But he didn't say anything, just smiled quietly and kept testing the game features. There weren't any major problems with the UI, and the face customization system was even more detailed than in his past life. After trying it for a bit, Lucas picked a default preset and entered the game. The first thing that stood out was the visuals. In the old Dark Souls games, or really the whole Souls series, graphics were never the main focus. Players didn't praise the graphics so much as the art design, like the fairy tale-like Cold Valley in Dark Souls 3 that amazed countless players seeing it for the first time. or the Fountainhead Palace in Sekiro, and Cathedral Ward in Bloodborne, all of which left a deep impression. But in this parallel world, technology was better than in his previous life, and the standard hardware was also higher. Lucas wasn't going to purposely hold back and make the graphics the same as before when they could be much better. After all, great visuals can also make the game experience better. And from what he'd seen so far, he was very happy with it. The game had a cold grey tone, the scene was bleak, and the ground was littered with bones and ash. A faint mist drifted in the air, giving off a slightly chilling feel. The atmosphere was fully set. The opening cutscene was still the same trailer from the earlier game show. It was just trimmed down a bit, removing some pauses that were only there to hype up the show's atmosphere, making the story flow better. Since the CG had cost a lot, he might as well use it fully. Once in the game, Lucas controlled his half-naked character wearing ragged shorts, holding a broken wooden shield and a drumstick-like club, and started trying out basic moves. Like before, there were tutorial messages on the ground and nearby, undead enemies for players to practice on. But Lucas didn't need them. He knew every detail of the game system like the back of his hand. Run, lock-on, light attack, heavy attack, weapon skills, and rolling. Lucas tested each move one by one. Then he opened the in-game console and typed a code to bring out a shield that could parry. The small broken wooden shield for the useless person start could only bash and couldn't parry, so to practice parrying, he needed one with the block skill. This code was just for convenience in the dev build. It would be removed in the final release. With the spawn shield equipped, Lucas walked up to the first undead enemy. He didn't attack right away, but circled it to draw its attention until it stood up. The undead let out a hoarse roar and charged at him with its broken sword. In Hector and the others' puzzled stares, a deep thunk came from the monitor's speakers. Those familiar with the combat system knew this was the sound of a successful parry. Lucas's character, facing the staggered undead kneeling on the ground, smashed its head with the club, instantly emptying its long health bar. The execution animation was more detailed than before. In the old Dark Souls, while there were different execution animations for weapon categories like greatswords, axes, straight swords, fists, and claws, each set was reused across several weapons. Lucas had improved that a lot here. Adding executions didn't really change the game's core content. But for players, it had a direct effect. Because these executions were a form of reward. Like in fighting games, when players build up a special meter and land a super move, they're treated to a flashy sequence. It's a reward system. Executions in Dark Souls work the same way. For enemies that could be parried, pulling off a parry and then an execution gave the player a visual payoff. And there was another benefit. If every weapon had its own execution, players would naturally get curious and want to see what each one looked like. What? You're asking if the whip has an execution animation, and this weapon too. Watching Lucas block and counter with his shield so smoothly, Hector and the others nearby were stunned. Why are you so good at this counter move, Boss Lucas? Shouldn't the normal way be to just run up and slash the zombie a couple of times to finish it? What's with starting off with a shield counter right away? Sure, the whole combat system and movement system in the game were designed by you, Boss Lucas. But whether it's asset creation or game testing, we've been the ones doing it first. So how come you're the one who's so skilled now? In the game, Lucas moved smoothly to reach the first bonfire and lit it. Then he ran and jumped onto another coffin step to pick up a glowing white item. Without losing a single drop of health, Lucas had already reached the first boss, Ash Judge Gunda. Hector and the others, who were expecting to see something flashy, were all dumbfounded. This was nothing like what they imagined. Still, even so, the group led by Hector had a little bit of hope left. After all, small enemies are one thing, but bosses are another. Even though Lucas is the producer, they were all part of making the game right. Knowing it is one thing, but actually playing it is something else entirely. It's like those guides or high-level tips. You can watch all the videos or read all the text you want, but can you actually do it afterward? Usually not. You might even post a comment saying, "This creator really thinks I can pull that off." Everyone stared closely at Lucas's next moves. Especially Hector, he'd been beaten badly by this boss before. In Dark Souls, most bosses share a trait: they're huge. That alone gives players a strong sense of pressure. On top of that, the bosses usually carry massive weapons that can attack from far away and often have wide-sweeping moves with huge attack ranges. Even though Ash Judge Gunda is the first boss, he still looks terrifying. His attacks are also extremely strong. Sure, you can block them with your shield, but it drains a huge chunk of stamina. And the killer part is that in Dark Souls, most bosses have two phases. Gunda is no exception. His second phase, where he turns into a black, pus-covered giant snake, had kept Hector stuck for quite a while before. As Hector and the others kept their expectant eyes on the screen, Lucas in the game got ready to start the boss fight. End of the chapter. When the spiral sword inside Gunda's body was pulled out, the boss, which had been like a statue, started to wake up. By then, Lucas had already switched his chicken leg weapon into dual-wield mode and let out a battle cry using the weapon's skill. While Gunda was still getting up, Lucas started swinging the chicken legs at him. The boss's health was dropping fast enough to see with the naked eye. Then, before Gunda could turn around, Lucas rolled back to create distance. As Gunda swung down with a massive chop, Lucas dodged to his back with ease, keeping an eye on his stamina bar so there was always at least one segment left, and continued attacking. The dual chicken legs kept pounding on Gunda until the boss suddenly staggered and dropped to one knee. Hector and the others knew Lucas had just broken his poise. With Gunda kneeling, Lucas kept spacing his attacks so he wouldn't drain all of his green stamina bar. Soon, with only half his health left, Gunda froze in place as his whole body was covered in black matter, transforming into a giant snake-like form with a deadly glare. While Gunda was in mid-transformation, Lucas snuck in 2 more hits. The transformed Gunda then leapt high into the air for a crushing slam, but Lucas rolled neatly through the attack's invincibility frames and landed 2 final swings, wiping out the rest of his health. With a roar, Gunda collapsed to the ground. Not bad at all, the combat system and moves are great. Let the team keep testing this part, Lucas said. As for the game balance and difficulty, let's keep it like this. Since this is the first boss players face, it shouldn't be too hard. From the current test results, Lucas was very satisfied. First, the game's visual presentation had improved a lot compared to his previous life. From the blood effects when attacking to the environmental destruction in the scenes. It was all excellent. For example, Gunda's swings would break the bricks in the courtyard ground. Of course, it's just a visual effect. For example, when Gunda's halberd slams the ground, it leaves cracks, but it won't actually make a deep hole. Like mentioned before, this doesn't affect the game's core content, but it does add to the overall experience. It's not a make-or-break feature, but it adds flavor and helps immerse players without them even noticing. As for the core difficulty, Lucas wasn't just making things up. Right now it felt pretty good. In his previous life, Gunda even had a nickname, the Quitter Boss. It served as a warning to players about what kind of game they were playing. If you can accept that, then congratulations, a new world is opening up to you. You might even unlock something special. But if you think Eudex Gunda is unbeatable, and it's making you feel hopeless, then before your refund period ends, asking for a refund might be the smart thing to do. Of course, there's also a more direct way, one that many Souls players on PC used in the past life. That is, to become the top disciple of the Wind Spirit Moon Shadow sect, or to put it simply, use a mod tool. Some players want to personally experience the story and gameplay instead of just watching videos, but their skills aren't enough. In that case, a mod tool is a good choice. To be honest, as a game creator, Lucas doesn't really look down on players using mods in single-player games. Every player has their own way of playing. But players who use mods still need some limits, because Dark Souls isn't purely a single-player game, if you're playing online instead of offline. While in Ember form, you might get invaded by other players, that's just part of the game's rules. There are benefits but also risks. So for this, Lucas followed the same approach as Dark Souls in the past life. Players can use mods, but once they do, the save file will be marked so it can't connect with normal players. When going online, it will be placed on a separate server just for players with modded saves. Also, modded saves can't unlock in-game achievements. Besides that, there are still normal online rules, like balance adjustments for stats. This stops players from making low-level characters with strong gear to become Great Wall Lords and invade clueless newbies who don't even know what Ember does. But Lucas won't that make the difficulty too low. Anna, who didn't know the whole story, shared her opinion. Yeah, feels kind of like a hack-and-slash game. This boss and the small enemies seem way too easy to beat, Rachel agreed. So Lucas, is Dark Souls actually a hack-and-slash game? Ethan from marketing asked. After all, for future promotion, game tags are very important. Hector and the rest of the combat system designers all looked stunned. Too easy, not tough enough, hack-and-slash, what are you talking about? Are you trying to kill players later on? And why is Lucas so good at this game? Hector and the others had mixed feelings. The game's fine, they're fine, so the only thing wrong here is Lucas. Who would have thought their boss is actually a gaming master? Seeing everyone's faces, Lucas smiled and waved it off. It's just because I know the boss's attack patterns, so it's easy for me to deal with. Normal players will still need practice. Ah, that makes sense. Everyone nodded in sudden understanding, but they gave Hector some strange looks. No one said anything, but Hector and his group could clearly guess their thoughts. Basically, weren't you guys the ones who worked on the Dark Souls combat numbers, boss moves, and battle system? And this is the too hard game you kept talking about. Are you sure you're not just bad at it? After Lucas left and seeing the way everyone was looking at them, Hector snorted and stood up. The other combat and animation designers moved aside to let him through. No words were needed, but the mood was perfectly clear. Easy. Then you try passing the flame. So unwilling to back down, they all sat down to play for themselves. Half an hour later, their expressions became a lot more complicated. I'll go talk to Lucas later. Maybe we should add some kind of death achievements in the game, so that even if players die, they still get some rewards or comfort, Anna said first. After dying, I think the screen could slowly fade from crimson to dark red to grey-white, and the "you died" text could be made a bit prettier to give players some comfort, Rachel added with a complicated look. Everyone glanced at each other, and they all understood the same thing. Good luck, players, that's the most they can do for you. Ethan, on the other hand, looked like he'd just been hit by a truck. Sure, it's easy for you guys to adjust. But what about him? When it comes to promoting the game, what kind of tags is he even supposed to use? He thought about Lucas's gameplay footage, and then remembered his own experience. Ethan felt lost. End of the chapter. On the official blog, many players tagged Lucas every day. Aside from the loyal fans, still playing games like Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys, most were people waiting for Dark Souls. So far, the official info was just a teaser shown at a game expo, along with some concept art of weapons and locations. The only things players knew were that the main character seemed to be carrying some flame of hope, and that the game world would be quite dark, probably with some sad or emotional parts, maybe similar to Valiant Hearts, The Great War. Still, a lot of players said they were fine with that. It just meant the story might be a bit sad. Having just gone through the emotional rollercoaster of Valiant Hearts, The Great War, they could handle it. The real question was when the game would be released. Lucas didn't keep players waiting long. Game media sites and video platforms started showing Dark Souls ads. These ads made people excited because they mentioned a lot of interesting things. For example, unique freedom of gameplay and a different kind of combat system, things that really got players hyped. At the same time, the physical edition of Dark Souls was already in production. In this world, digital games were the main format. Physical editions were more for collectors, like deluxe versions that came with figures, art books, and other goodies. But what really got players excited was that Nebula Games announced they would hold an online livestream event for Dark Souls, showing the latest real gameplay footage and revealing the release date. With that news and the ads, the hype for Dark Souls caught fire. Even the game industry was surprised. Lucas seems to be putting a lot of effort into Dark Souls. Yeah, while the marketing isn't on the same level as Skynova or NetDragon's biggest projects, it's still a big move for a PC title. Well, it is Lucas's first big-budget game, and honestly, Nebula Games can take risks now. True, forget Legends of the Three Kingdoms for a moment. Fall Guys alone made them a ton of money earlier this year. What I'm more interested in is that Nebula Games says Dark Souls will be a little different from traditional ARPGs. What could be different? ARPGs are usually story-focused, action-focused, or all about level stats. Those are the main types. I don't think it'll be that simple. Lucas's games always have surprises. That's true, but his past games weren't large-scale projects. This is his first big one, so it might not turn out as well as people hope. As Nebula Games started promoting Dark Souls, many game designers in the industry began discussing it. But regular players didn't care about that. They just wanted the days to pass faster, so the online launch event would come, and they could finally hear the release date. Time flew and the day arrived. The live stream was held in Nebula Games' office, which had been decorated for the event. On the table were a custom Firekeeper figure and a bonfire model with a spiral sword. Behind them hung Dark Souls concept art posters. On all major streaming platforms, Nebula Games' channel was featured on the front page. They had arranged this with the platforms well in advance. It was a win-win deal. The event would also have live chat giveaways, with prizes like Dark Souls collector figures, deluxe editions, and randomly selected standard edition CD keys for regular viewers. Before the stream began, the camera only showed the background. Still, tons of players had already joined the chat. Even with a 30-second message cooldown, the comments flew by like snowflakes. It was clear that thanks to their past hit indie games, Nebula Games still had a big following. Of course, a lot of viewers were probably just there for the fun. After making sure everything was ready, video playback, scene transitions, Lucas appeared on screen right on time. Hello to everyone watching the stream. I'm Lucas, the lead developer of Dark Souls. I'm sure you're all here for one reason, so I won't waste time. Let's get straight to it and take a look at what Dark Souls looks like in real gameplay. No long introductions or small talk, Lucas went straight to the point. After all, this was a game launch stream. People came to see the game, not filler. As soon as he finished speaking, the stream switched to a new screen. This time, it wasn't the pre-rendered trailer. This time, it was a pure in-game animation demo. You could clearly see the UI display on screen in the video. It lasted about a minute, showing mainly a boss fight and a regular enemy fight. The first thing you saw was the Ash Judge Gunda at Firelink Shrine. His massive body looked truly overwhelming, and the halberd-like weapon in his hands was even more intimidating. When the boss swung his weapon down, you could clearly see the ground crack apart in the video. The player character in the video was later re-recorded by Lucas. The video was mainly to show some basic game actions, like blocking, rolling, shield parries, executions, and backstabbing smaller enemies. Of course, to keep some surprises for the players, Gunda's second phase was skipped entirely in the video. It also showed things like running jumps and messages on the ground acting as hints, pretty much all shown in the footage. Countless players watching the live stream, as well as some media and industry designers, were buzzing with their own opinions. End of the chapter, this battle system kind of feels like a night duel. The moves aren't flashy at all, really plain and by the book. But fighting a giant boss like that, that's pretty exciting. Yeah, this Ash Judge Gunda looks really strong. But don't you think the difficulty might be off? Or maybe in the demo they were wearing gear that was too good, that boss fight felt way too short. Exactly, it didn't feel satisfying at all. Sure, crushing a boss feels amazing, but taking half its HP in just 30 seconds is way too fast. Well, it's just a demo. When players actually play, the pace will change depending on their gear and level. Right now it's mainly to show the combat system. That's true, the combat system looks fine to me, at least from what I've seen. Yeah, once the full version comes out, the difficulty will probably be higher. Worst case, you can just play on the hardest mode. I just hope the game offers a challenge. Short fights always feel unsatisfying. Exactly. A lot of players were sharing their thoughts in the livestream chat. Most of the discussion focused on the boss fight flow and the visuals. After the video ended, Lucas picked some of the most liked questions from the chat to answer, and also talked about Dark Souls. I'm sure everyone's seen the Dark Souls gameplay demo. What we can tell players now is that this will be a stage-based progression game. I've also noticed players asking if the boss fight was too short or if the difficulty curve was too easy. That ties into the game's core design, which is also what makes Dark Souls different from other ARPGs. All I can say is that Dark Souls will be a special game. As for how long a boss fight lasts, that's up to the player. It depends on how fast or slow you play. I've also seen players wondering if this is a hack-and-slash game. All I can say is that you can play it like one, but that still depends on the player's skill. In fact, for some players, Dark Souls will still be very challenging. Hearing Lucas say this, the viewers kept sending comments in the chat. The stream's popularity was also climbing quickly. Even though most players came away from Lucas's answers feeling like they'd listened, but didn't really get much, the hype was definitely there. The online game showcase was still going on. After the short combat system presentation, Lucas also showed players various in-game locations on the big screen. From Firelink's shrine at the start, to Lothric's high wall after passing through it, then the catacombs, Cathedral of the Deep, Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, Farron Keep. Each location was shown from close-up to far away, letting players clearly see the details up close, and the breathtaking scale when zoomed out left the audience amazed. It was obvious these weren't just concept art images Lucas had posted before. They were actual in-game environments that impressed not only the players, but also game designers who had been following the project closely. In a certain game designers chat group, people were also talking about Dark Souls. Lucas's Dark Souls has some amazing art design. Yeah, you could definitely call it top tier. But looking at so many locations, this Dark Souls seems like a big project. I'm actually a little doubtful. True, this is Lucas's first ARPG, and he's going this big. Having this many areas is definitely a big challenge. That's already 7 or 8 locations, right? I wonder how long the whole game will be. As long as the story and gameplay aren't a big letdown, this Dark Souls will already be halfway to success. Yeah, the visual design for these locations is just incredible. Especially that scene in Cold Valley, it was amazing. Industry-followed game designers thought so. And players in the official livestream chat were also flooding it with exclamation marks. No doubt about it, just from the combat gameplay and the art design alone, Dark Souls was already halfway to success. Whether it could become a truly great game would depend on how it performed later. After all, a game can't be judged by just one thing. You have to look at the whole picture, how much content it has and how deep the experience goes. Even if a game uses the best technology in the industry and pushes visuals to the max, if its content, like the story, is weak, it's still hard to win players over. Like when a game has first-class visuals. But as a story-driven game, it makes players watch the main character's loved one get their head blown off, then go through a revenge-retirement-revenge cycle, and finally, just as the revenge succeeds, learn some violence begets violence life lesson. Could you call that a masterpiece? Most players would have a very clear answer to that. For Dark Souls, it had only reached its basic minimum so far. Whether it could become a great work, and how far it could go, still depended on the story and gameplay content. At the end of the launch livestream, under the eager gaze of countless players at their computers, Lucas finally announced the release date. Dark Souls will officially launch on October 1st, priced at $37. Of course, that was the public price, but as the first big title on the Nebula Games platform. It was both the platform's flagship and a way to bring in users. To boost sales, Lucas didn't make it an exclusive title. It was too risky. But using a money-off approach was fine, since Nebula Games still had plenty of funds. The public price was $37, but players buying it on the Nebula Games platform would also get a $9 coupon. For Nebula Games right now, the key was to build a user base and slowly guide them into spending on the platform, making it harder for them to leave. The livestream viewers didn't know all that. They were just happy the game they'd been waiting months for was finally coming. After months of waiting, it was finally here. End of the chapter, with the release date getting closer and closer. Nebula Games' ad spending was starting to show. Game media sites were full of Dark Souls features and reports. Streaming and video platforms also had related Dark Souls events. And the most direct move, Nebula Games' discount event for Dark Souls. The $9 coupon could only be used on the Nebula Games platform. Giving players real money savings like this was very effective at attracting them. After the event was announced, Nebula Games gained about 150,000 new users. And the number was still going up. But for most players, the biggest thing was that they could finally play Dark Souls. On major game forums and communities, you could feel the players' excitement from their posts. After such a long wait, it was finally time to link the fire. In a neighborhood in the capital, Zach and Hannah were discussing plans for the National Day holiday. How about Nine Glories Mountain? Zach suggested. Why go to Nine Glories Mountain? People go there to burn incense. Besides, can you even handle the hike? Last year at Nine Glories Mountain, you took the cable car the whole way, and for the remaining steps you walked a few and were already complaining. Hannah rolled her eyes. They tossed around a few other ideas, but each had its flaws. Either it was too tiring, too crowded, or people said it wasn't fun. Finally, they came to the same idea without even saying it. How about we just play games? I heard Nebula Games' Dark Souls is out. Great idea, Hannah, also a gamer, agreed. Mainly because there wasn't anywhere worth going for a trip. Especially thinking about all the tourist spots during a holiday like National Day, packed with people. That's not a vacation, that's torture. This way was better. Stay home with the AC on, eat ice cream, and enjoy the pure fun of gaming. That's life. It says hard. This game seems like a hard one. As the frugal ones they were, the two of them naturally chose the Nebula Games platform. When they entered the store page, Hannah noticed something. Dark Souls on the Nebula Games platform had 4 official tags: ARPG, Dark Fantasy, Exploration and Adventure, and Hard. Hearing Hannah, Zach, who was scanning to pay, casually replied, "Real players don't look at tags. They're all just for show. How hard can it be? We both watched the online showcase before. It didn't look that bad." "All right, I bought it. Time to link the fire," Zach stretched. "But I heard playing this game in co-op is a bit of a hassle," Hannah said to Zach. Lucas had mentioned this during the online showcase when talking about multiplayer. "Let's just share one save and one computer. Whoever dies passes the turn to the other." Zach thought for a moment and suggested. "All right," Hannah agreed. Life needs some variety, and playing games together sounded great. The game was pretty big, so after paying, the two of them chatted while waiting for it to download and install. Once it was ready, they started the game. Right as they entered, a voice of an old woman played along with the visuals. "Yes, this is Lothric. Familiar lines, familiar scenes." Seeing this, Zach and Hannah exchanged a glance and joked. "Isn't this just the same trailer they showed at the expo?" Yeah, Nebula Games is really taking shortcuts here. Still, even while complaining, they didn't skip it and watched again. The whole CG cutscene was really well made. It must have cost a lot to make, otherwise Lucas wouldn't have reused it in the game. After the cutscene, the character creation screen appeared, which didn't surprise them at all. A lot of ARPGs start this way, letting players make their own character. The name was simple and easy to remember, just 123. Then came the face customization. Zach naturally took over this part. "Let's go with old age. Old ginger is spicier after all. No beard means no credibility, so let's add a beard. For hair, give him twin tails in silver, old but young at heart. Make the eyes narrow. Narrow eyes always look like a villain. Give the lips a bit of crimson to show a thirst for blood." After a flurry of adjustments, a very strange-looking character appeared on the screen. Hannah stayed quiet for a moment. "I feel like you're asking for a beating." "Ahem, enough of that. Looks like we can also choose a class and starting gear, you decide." Zach coughed and changed the subject. "Let's go with deprived. The stats look really balanced, like a jack of all trades, which should be strong. For the burial gift, let's pick this white branch. The last one on the list should be the strongest, right? From the description, it sounds like a time-limited transformation card that makes your character super strong. Hannah summed up from her gaming experience, then picked Deprived with the white branch. Once everything was set, the screen went black for a moment, then the game loaded in. The camera slowly zoomed in, locking onto a desolate graveyard. From one of the coffins came a rattling sound. A hand reached out from inside, and the Deprived named 123 they had created slowly climbed out. At the same time, the game UI appeared. In the middle of the screen, the name of the area popped up, Cemetery of Ash. Zach looked at the UI layout. In the bottom left were a small broken wooden shield, a wooden club, and something called an Estus flask, probably part of the inventory. The top left had the status bars. As a gamer, Zach could guess easily: red for health, blue for mana, green for stamina. Most ARPGs and action games had layouts like this, nothing surprising. It's basically common knowledge among players. No developer would be so bored as to swap the colors of health and mana just to be different. In third-person view, Zach slowly moved the mouse, looking at the surroundings. A bleak, ruined graveyard with white ash-like mist in the air. Thick clouds completely blocked the sun, and the dim, grey light felt heavy and oppressive. Quit admiring the scenery and figure out the controls. That red thing on the ground should be one of those messages Lucas mentioned at the showcase. I'm still waiting for you to die, so it's my turn, Hannah urged. You underestimate me. For all you know, you'll be sitting there all day. Zach refused to admit defeat, but still walked over to the message and interacted with it. End of the chapter. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story.